Okay, so now it's just about kind of tweaking these individual layers to get the effect you want. So one thing I'm going to do is darken the base layer a bit here. Try tweaking this layer again. Actually, I'm just going to try blurring that layer there. Possibly even blurring this layer underneath here as well. And I don't really like this area here, so let's go to our clone stamp. Make sure you're on current layer up here, and then we'll just erase that out of there. Okay, so I'm happy enough with that as a kind of basic parchment start. So let's just work on this text a little bit. So we'll select the text layer here. I'll reduce the opacity a bit. We'll duplicate it. Just to make it kind of sit better with this, we'll blur that as well, as if it's kind of blurred into the paper a bit more. The ink's bled into the paper. There, you can see that makes enough of a difference there. Okay, so that's a good start to the parchment layer. I also want a kind of surrounding edge around this of something that makes it look a bit darker kind of around the edges. So we'll add another new layer, and if you scroll down in your layers tab, hold Control and click on the label layer. Then if I go to my brush tool here, I'll just then hold Alt and click on a layer here, and we'll just select a darker colour, something like that. And then in my brush tools, I'm just going to create a brush on here. Now if you open up your brush settings here, which I believe are option on here on CS5, but I have them here, then you can actually do things like change the scattering and the shape dynamics as well. So it's worth kind of playing around with these till you get the effect that you want. So I'm literally just going to paint a darker edge around here. I might make that colour even kind of darker, and desaturate it a bit as well, and just kind of paint the surrounding area to be darker, like so. I'll add an edge in here too. So we end up with something like that. I'm then going to just come over to my eraser tab here, and again select a brush. Probably already got one there that I want to use, but we'll make a different one anyway, just so you can tweak your own one. So something like that, and then I can just erase out individual bits, like so. And then I can also come over to, just change that too, just so that I can come in here and delete this area too. Okay, so that should do it. I could then also change my blend mode type as well. So I leave it on multiply, then put my opacity down. Or you can leave it on normal and then leave your opacity up. It's totally up to you. So something like that should do. So we've got our label area now painted. Now one useful little thing to do actually is to hold Control and click on the label tab here, and then on layer 4, if I just assign something like a hue saturation, you'll see because I had that area selected, it's actually applied that as a mask to the hue saturation, and now I can do things like just tweak the saturation down or even change the hue of that entire area if I need to. Or even I can tweak the kind of lightness or whatever as well. I can even change the opacity of that if I only want it to kind of half effect. So let's just save this texture out now. So save as Targa, and we'll go to our textures folder and we'll just save over TA bottle main, and in 3ds Max, there you go, we can see the label now applied. Other little things we can do, we could select this layer here, and you can apply, say, a brightness contrast to it. And if you hold Alt and then go in between the line in between the brightness contrast layer and the layer you want affected, and just click, you'll see you'll get this little line here, and then you can tweak the brightness of that layer if you want to change it, like so. Then you can just turn it off and on to see if that's making any difference. Okay, so we'll save that out again. And again, preview that in 3ds. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is the liquid. So if we shrink our label here, we'll again make a new layer and we'll call this liquid. We'll drop liquid into there. And I'm just going to select all that, and I'm going to make a new layer. Sorry, just select it. If you hold Control and click on the layer, it will select whatever's in that layer. So that's how I'm doing that. So in my new layer, I'm going to go to my brush, which I can use with B on the keyboard, and I'm going to hold Alt and click on the layer to get the colour, and I'm just going to increase the brightness of that. I'm then going to make a brush for making a crazy kind of liquid shape. So something like that maybe. Just try applying that onto there. So I'm not really sure what this is going to look like initially, to be honest. I'm just going to kind of make, we're just going to have a mess about and see what we can get the liquid to look like. You could use a reference image to define this, or do what I'm doing here and just kind of go a bit crazy with it. So select graphic colour. Then blur that as well if you wanted, or we could add another layer too under there. This time we use something like this. In fact, I'll put that layer above there. Like so. Okay, so again we'll save this out, making sure we go to our recent places, textures, and just save over our original one. And so we can see our strange material in there now. One thing you might want to do is actually edit this shape a little bit, just to give it a bit of roughness to make it actually look like there is something weird in there that's not just kind of a block like that. So you could do that easily enough just by adding an edit poly modifier on top, selecting the top vertices here, and if we assign a noise modifier to those, we'll just tweak the settings a little bit so we end up with something like that, so a little bit of variation on it there. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is the actual cap. So again we'll add another group and call this cap and put that into there. And we won't do too much with this actually for now. What you can do is just create a new layer here, zoom into this here, select a kind of light grey, we'll click on one top point to the bottom top point there, we'll just turn the opacity right down on that, and then we'll just paint the edge this area and the edge of our top cap as well. And we'll just try something like that. So again, we'll save this over our going to add another edit poly on top to go to that selection area. And there we have our finished model. Come into edit poly and pull this down to avoid any serious kind of jagged areas. Okay, so that's our model now created. All we need to do now is export it. So if we select the model and just go to export selected, and in our UDK folder, remember we had the models folder here, and we'll save this as TA bottom. Make sure you've got mesh normals and mapping chords ticked on and hit OK. So because now we had the we had glass and bottle main in our material, and we had a diffuse texture in each one, we should find that when we import it into UDK, we can assign two materials. So if we come into UDK here, now obviously the first thing we need to do is actually set up our package. So it's very important that you do this correctly right from the get-go, because if you get it right straight from your first model, then you won't have any issues later on. You won't have to redo your package or anything like that. So and this can cause numerous problems if you don't set it up correctly first. So in new packages, if you just go to new, and we'll call this TA Inventors Lab, and hit OK. So there's our new package there. And then we're going to go to import. Well, first of all we're going to right click and go to save, and I'm just going to save this in this root folder here. So where I've made my UDK folder, I'll just put it straight in the root there. So, and then in my package here, I'm going to go to import, and I'm going to import the textures and the model that I've made. Then go to import and browse to my textures. Okay, so now we've got the textures, and then I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to go to save. So it's worth at this point just doing a test just to make sure this is going to work. So if we pull in our mesh here, and we could even just test the texture just by selecting it and dragging it onto the, oh that's not going to let us do that, it might let us do it on the floor. No, okay, it needs to be a material, so we'll leave that for now and we'll just build all on this. Okay, so once it's built, if we just do play from here, if you get this error, this is basically referring to the fact we've saved our package outside of UDK, the UDK root folder. So if we played this in the actual game, it wouldn't work, but we can still play it in our browser window. And there's our canister object. Okay, so now we've tested that, we know it works. So now we can make our two materials. Just to show you how it works in terms of the fact that in Max we had two materials here. If I come to UDK and double click on the static mesh, you'll see that in elements we have two, and there's two different materials, 0 and 1. And that refers to 1 and 2 in Max. So 0 is going to be glass and 1 is going to be bottle main. So if we right click in our package and we'll make a new material and we'll call this TA bottle glass underscore matte. And we'll pull our texture into this, assign it to the diffuse, and you can see here we've got this, the black slot is all of our colours and the white slot is our alpha, and these are the individual colours. So we'll assign our alpha into our opacity, and in our material settings down here we'll just select blend translucent, and now that's going to create our translucent material. So there's our material there. So what we can then do is select the material, and in 0 here, in material just assign from the content browser. And there we go, we can see the translucent material is now applied. So if we right click again and go to new material, we'll call this TA bottle main matte, and we'll drag in our texture and assign that into the diffuse, and we'll just leave that as is for now. Select the material and again we'll assign that, but this time in slot 1. So in material here, just hit the little green tab, and there we go, we can see that's now assigned. So if we scroll down here, we can see our canister. Now at the moment you can see it's not two-sided, so if you double click the material you can select two-sided from here and say OK. And there you go, now you can see the cap is two-sided. Okay, so I'm just going to rotate that round so the label is facing the front there. Let's try building that. And the other thing we want to do before we even play that is just right click on our package and just hit save. And there we can see our canister in game there. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is have a quick mess around with our specularity. So if we double click on our glass material, and what we're going to do is we're going to pull in a constant free vector from here, and you'll see this gives us red, green and blue tabs. So let's try putting 1 into the red tab, and you can see because we've got 1 in red and 0 in green and blue, that's given us full on red. So let's try applying that into specular, and you'll see we get a red glow. So obviously we want a kind of greeny, light green glow on this. So let's try putting that nice and high. And then if you bring in a constant, so that's our specular colour. So if we bring in a constant here and assign that in specular power, you can then control the glossiness of the shine. So obviously it's glass, so I suppose we want a reasonably strong shine like that, maybe a bit less. But if we want to reduce the power, we just come into here. So you can control the power and the colour with this green controller here, and you control the glossiness with the specular power with this white one here. So we'll save that. And we'll do the same with our other material here. So this is where you might want to maybe drop this into specular power, and then use a constant to control the glossiness. So obviously we have different types of material on this, so this is where you would actually paint a specular map as opposed to using kind of constants here. Just to show you where we can do that, if we assign a multiply node in here, we'll add that into there. So I'm just going to break all these links, drop that into diffuse, drop that into there, and white into multiply. In fact, we'll make another constant here. Just something like that, maybe even less, so try 5. Then we can drop that into specular there. So there we go, we've now done the specular for our other material too. So again, we'll rebuild this. Preview this again. And there's our completed canister thingy. Now, one of the advantages of doing things in this way mean we now actually have a glass material here that we could assign to anything that has a glass on it. So all you do in Max, like if I've made, say, another model here, something like that, and it's a similar thing, it's just this time it's a longer canister. I could apply the same material like so, set ID 1 to be the glass, like so I can just reuse that glass material whenever I want. I could even technically reuse the whole material on this, because if I assign 2 to that and then applied an unwrap, then just select the top and the bottom here. Make sure that back facing isn't turned on, and break those off. Then I could literally just drop these into here. Yes, means I'm not going to get the white highlight, but it's a kind of free use of this material. Like so there, so I haven't even needed to create a new texture, and I've already got a kind of new model out of it. So the advantage of kind of using this technique are I can just set up a bunch of materials and then kind of reusing them by just assigning them into each of my IDs in here. So the last thing to do is just make sure that this is saved, and now also you can use this package for the rest of your assignment.